WomanUp podcast speaks to and about women and non-binary artists, as well as academics, writers, activists, midwives, carers and more. Those challenging ideas and ideals, questioning assumptions and provoking social change. It's a podcast dedicated to creating a living archive of these people and this work that anyone can access. We find those trying to change current structures founded on bias. Those working intersectionally across gender, race, sexuality, disability, as well as having caring responsibilities. We have conversations about lived experiences, achievements and aspirations, as well as fantastic artwork. In 2023, for Series 5, we received a National Lottery Project grant from Arts Council England to take the podcast on tour. For our second episode in Newcastle, we're recording again at the Newbridge Project, but this time with the South Sheilds-based project, Sangini. Hello and welcome to the WomanUp podcast on tour. We're really excited, myself, Susan, Merrick and producer Amy Dignam, who's also in the room in the background, to be still in the Newbridge project as we were in our previous episode with Lady Kit. But today we are now talking to Padma Rao and Nasim Akhtar, both from the Sangini project based in South Sheilds. So I'm going to do a quick introduction and then I'd love you both to tell me more about the project. So Padma Rao is director of Sangini, and Sangini is based in the northeast of England. Padma is also a contemporary visual artist practicing painting and contemporary drawing, a visiting lecturer, arts facilitator and a published poet. Padma has over 20 years' experience in the arts, heritage, community development, equalities and women's issues. Padma has an art studio in Macan in South Sheilds in the UK, where she has shown works of art by artists based locally, nationally and internationally. A published poet, Padma has a background of working in the radio, both at the BBC Radio Newcastle as well as in India. In her role at Sangini, Padma leads on the strategic development of the programme of work that includes developing partnerships and sustainability and representation of black women's voices at local, regional and national networks. Padma is passionate about the role and status of marginalised women in our current society, and by exploring these issues through her work, both as an artist as well as in her role at Sangini, she aims to create a platform for the wider discussions around creativity, equality, feminism, identity and displacement of black women. Nasim Akhtar is an artist living near Durham. She loves textures of different fabrics, and she says, I make textile and art patchwork quilts. I've been sewing since I was very young. I use watercolours and acrylics to make abstract images, as well as using digital manipulation to finish a piece. Nasim's artwork is displayed at Eden Art Gallery in Seaham. The art that she does has run alongside a 30-year career in probation services, in particular working to develop on services for women who commit crime. Writing poems and short stories has helped her to record reflections and events. She has a manuscript inspired by her father's journey to the UK, which shaped the family, including herself. She's a member of Easington Writers and a local book club. Nasim's been involved with Sangini for about 6 months and is very inspired by the talent of the diverse group of women artists around the world who are involved. And you've also had work in exhibitions at Sangini, which would be great if you could tell us a bit more about. But first of all, Padma, could you tell us about the inception of Sangini, how long it's been around, what the purpose has been and what the aims are?
Sangini means a friend in Hindi, and it was set up by a group of women, essentially led by its founder member called Srilekha Reddy, and she is currently the chair. She invited a group of women simply because 20 years ago, when there was very little infrastructure for black and diverse women to, find help within the mainstream institutions and agencies, and dealing with isolation, invited them just to kind of come together to support each other. And it was at that time, when I kind of was visiting the group as it was, they would just make some food and get together and they found a sense of camaraderie and really helping each other. So like if somebody felt like she couldn't do something, the other women would encourage her. So to give an example, initially there was one woman who always needed to be dropped off by her husband. And this one time she didn't turn up, and all the women were a bit concerned, like why he didn't come. She said, oh, my husband was busy. He didn't have time to drop me off. And that's when they got hold of her, like, you need to learn driving, and that'll give you freedom. And I was at the anniversary event when they said she had passed her driving test. And to me, that was a testament of what the women have been doing and have achieved. And I suggested, because by then I was working in the arts and with the Arts Council, I was working as diversity officer. And I suggested that they were doing something, important. It was a catalyst role that they were playing. So I suggested, why don't they give themselves a name and some aims and objectives? And again, I'll mention this here. They asked, what does it involve? And I explained it becomes a legal entity. And then you start to exist. And more than half of the women, they didn't want to join. Because it shows that how the lack of knowledge about their own role in terms of civic role that they can actually play in the wider society, which gives them that fear that, oh no, this is something not for us. So it was only 3 or 4 women who agreed to stay on, essentially led by Sri Lanka. And I was there, and another 2 members, Swadesh, she was also a core member. And we then invited, so organization was set up, and then we sent a call out, invited other women to join in. And to begin with, it was a South Asian women's organization. But within 6 months, we realized that it has to be opened up to local white women, because the organization exists within that bigger picture. Whilst there is a need to focus on diverse women's needs, black women's needs, it's equally important to make sure that the organization is inclusive, and we are engaging with local white women who are equally disadvantaged because of their class, for example. So since then, we removed the South Asian, women's organization and made it an all-inclusive. But it's led by BME, like black and minoritized women. So in the constitution, the percentage is higher. So that's how legally it's maintained, and that it's a black and minoritized women-led organization.
Great.
So its aim is to raise awareness about health and well-being issues, and whilst doing that through arts, crafts, social and recreational activities, we also promote cultural diversity. So that's what we do, and we do we do this through projects, advocacy, outreach, like advice and guidance, also training and development. These form the core kind of activities that we do.
Okay. Has art always played a part in Sangini, or is that something that's developed over time?
The arts played an integral element of our work right from the beginning, because what we felt, art, the whole cultural expression, is part of who we are. And when we actually began right at the beginning, we would go out into schools to raise awareness about who we are. And what we had to share with the wider public was the dance, the music that we brought to this country. And I'm a first-generation immigrant, so for me, that's what I brought, the literature that I had learned. So, and to share that with young people, for example, in schools, or adults, when we did workshops, we realized that that made and a very easy way to kind of get in touch with people, talk to them, and it broke down barriers. So the arts, and also I'm an artist, so from the beginning I found it easy to kind of use that as a vehicle to reach out to people. So the arts and heritage, and again, it's about the idea of settlement, displacement, migration, and what heritage are you actually bringing into a new place, and what sense of heritage you're taking from this new place. All of that kind of informs your identity, and which is constantly evolving. So heritage also became a very important part of our driver. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's been around for 20 years, did you say?
Yeah. We've been going for 20 years. We've worked with, so as part of that, we work with artists. That's the key. As much as we are a community arts organization, we can say, but we work with artists who are professional, who have experience of working with diverse women, so they know the barriers that they could be facing and the needs, because the women from black and minoritized women, black and minoritized communities, they find it difficult to engage with arts and culture, mainly because for them it's not a ready priority. For them it's more important in terms of their health, education, or if you're experiencing violence or domestic abuse, then that whole area in terms of fleeing that situation and finding a refuge, a safe place. So we realized that it's not about the arts that you put forward to say, oh, you're going to feel great. The art becomes a medium for them to talk to each other, to be able to express what they're feeling. We had some powerful projects that we were able to do with the women. For example, I think it was 2009, we did a project called Shakti, where we invited a theatre company, a poet, and a visual artist. And we worked with women. And again, this was a learning point for us. We said, this is a project about domestic violence and abuse. And this was the first familiarization session, talking to them. And they said, actually, we will not be allowed to take part because, as soon as you say it's about domestic violence, that's it, doors will be closed. So we had to rephrase it. Okay. And we said, actually, this project is about love. And straight away they said, yeah, fantastic, we can. But that opened those doors. It's about the lack of love or that relationship, the inequality. And that exhibition was extremely powerful. I invited my head of department at the time in the Arts Council where I was working. She was in tears because, some of the ways the women expressed themselves. There was this one door in one of the exhibits and a light switch. And I asked what this light switch is about, and she said it was the way his mood would just go on and off. Yeah. Wow. And they found that medium, that way to actually talk about their situation. So that's why we feel the arts and crafts is the most powerful way to access and work with the women and help them to talk about themselves and their stories.
Thank you, Padma. So, Nasim, you've been involved in Sangini for about 6 months, you said. Can you tell us about your role and how you came to be involved?
Months ago, and it was through another exhibition from Eden Gallery we had done at Sunderland Cathedral at Christmas time, and I found out about Sangini at the time. And I met Padma and some other artists that were linked with Sangini. And I just couldn't believe it, that there were women who had a like-minded interest who looked like me, talked like me, they had some food preferences like me. I had moved up from West Yorkshire where I grew up. So I had only moved up about 3 years ago, so I was just beginning to get the lay of the land of coming up to Durham and just getting used to the area. We'd also had COVID, and I'd just joined the Edam Gallery about a year before. So I was absolutely amazed that there were women who looked like me, Asian women, there were Polish women, there was a massive diverse group of women. And to be asked, without even looking at my work, to say, would you like to exhibit in our next exhibition? It's called We Are Here at Washington Arts Centre. And I just felt there's so much generosity, which you said, Padma, that people are trusting me at face value. So I was just absolutely elated. And as I got to know more about Sangini, I felt my own personal values were very much aligned to the organisation's values. That it was about looking at women's lives and seeing how we could improve women's lives through art to improve mental health and well-being, because that's the core of everybody's sort of being, really. If you don't have well-being, you can't really progress in other areas. So I was just absolutely amazed that I could be involved. And then a couple of months ago, I was asked if I would like to be more involved, and I just jumped at the chance. And it chimed with my own background, because I've got like 30 years in probation work in West Yorkshire, and I'd always had an interest in working with women to reduce who had come in contact with probation because they'd got in trouble. But many of the stories were around being abused or coerced, and many of their crimes were around theft. And the prison experience was very much sort of, I was really interested in that. So I had this interest already about women, and through my career in probation services, I tried to veer towards women. And as an officer, I ran a couple of groups. One was for wives and partners of Asian men who were in prison, because they didn't understand the language, they couldn't understand the processes. That was in the very early 90s, and then I ran a group for women who were on court orders, and I was absolutely surprised that the agenda I had, or the timetable I had, they didn't want. And what they wanted was, how do they actually cover the bruises? How do they cover the marks on their faces? How do they get clothes that they can go for a job interview? And I just thought, there is more we can do. And when I was a manager, I worked at Wakefield Women's Prison, and that was an insight in itself. And I worked there for a couple of years. And we had a contract for counselling, but you could see the need was much more greater because of women's experiences in relationships. And the counselling was rape crisis counselling. And there was a huge, big waiting list. And I always sort of tried to promote more of that rather than less of that. So that I had that insight of working in a prison alongside prison governors and prison staff. And some of them were really, really good. They were very enlightened. They would go the extra mile. And later on, when I became a manager, I did several act-ups, and one of them was around how I did a review of services to women who commit crime from an organisational perspective. And then I moved on to manage a contract that was testing out specific approaches in the community for working with women, having a women-only centre, working with the voluntary sector. So when I came across Sangini, the two ideas merged, and I had already been interested in art myself. I'd done lots of sewing really from a very young age. My mum's friend would give me all her offcuts and say, you have them, you play with them, and I didn't like dolls, but I liked to put them together. And then when I was at school, school said I couldn't, this was the early 80s, late 70s, I couldn't go on to do my A-levels. So when I wanted to go to sixth form, and really I should be looking at getting married. So I carried on with the sewing because I felt that was something I could do. But I enjoyed it as well. And then I got into making patchwork quilts, and I would give them away for fundraising when the family had had enough. And then I would get the acrylic paints out and the watercolours out, and then I got into digital art and just doing lots of that. And then I left work in 2019. We moved up to Durham. My husband said, do what you want. And I just got all my stuff out, and I've got a dedicated room. I feel very, very lucky that I can do that. COVID hit, but I thought, right, this is my chance. I've got to look forward. And this is what happens when things come together for you. So it's like you can say, well, you can look at it and say, not now, or you can say, I can do this. I believe myself, and I got into it, and I got into Eden art, and I thought, God, they want my work. And it's been, I wouldn't say a challenge, it's been an exciting journey. And I've always wanted to do this, so all the things that I'd done at home, and now I can put into a gallery, I can exhibit. But I always feel that it's not about me, it's about, can I help somebody else? I've always said, even as a practitioner, when I was a practitioner, you can hold the key to something. You can sow a seed in somebody's mind that they could do it just by taking out some paints and saying, I'll just have a go. It's okay, you're not going to waste anything, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You don't know when they're going to go back. And time and again, when I was working, people would come back and say, do you know, so-and-so said that. And I did go and do it, and especially women coming back and saying, I can work, I don't want this life, I can really work. But the violence against women, the Sangini's thread, which are one of the threads I really like, is about reducing violence against women through improving health and well-being and emotional well-being. And women can get talked at, and you can have lots of practitioners saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. And for us, it's not about that. It's about saying, enjoy yourself, enjoy what you're doing. And if you talk in the process, that's good. You can do a bit of painting, you can do some sewing, you can, the lentil, I'm looking at Padma, the lentil flowers, rangoli, you do. That it's creative, and it gives women some tools that they can say, actually, I can do something with my hands, I can think creatively, I can. It's not always about exhibiting, and it's not always about selling products, but it's sometimes about enjoying what you've got and having a bit of self-actualisation and saying, living in the moment, I can do this, I enjoy it. So does that sort of answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested then for both of you as artists as well as, as well as your roles within Sangini and your other previous roles, Nasim. Does that feed into the work that you do? Does that feed into the work that you make, or is it a separate process?
For me, it feeds in. I try and write down things so I don't forget. So I write poetry and I write short stories, and I've mentioned my manuscript as well, but the short stories are often about women that look like me, who are going through different experiences, but my work experience and the situations I've come across often feed into that. So it's not about saying, I'm here, I'm going to do this, and it's all of your experiences come together. So I'm just at the moment looking back at a poem that I wrote just as I was graduating to become qualified, and it's about women and women's experience of violence. I think I read it to Padma about a month ago.
Do you have any with you that you could share with us?
Oh, I haven't got it with me, but I can send it over.
That would be amazing.
And I looked and I was reflecting on it and thinking, what has changed? There's lots of legislation that has changed, but actually women's lives in some aspects have changed because there's more women in work, there's some childcare available, there's some acceptance, but we've had the Me Too movement. There's a lot more legislation around coercive control, about financial control. Just as I was leaving, statutory agencies would get together on a daily basis, led by the police, to look at all the instances of domestic violence the night before and develop action plans that the agencies would take away. But then you look at women's lives experiences and I'm thinking, what has really changed? Because that experience still goes on. Women are still told, and we hear it, that they can't do this. They were groped by a man. That happened to them. They've been raped. And look at the rape crisis statistics. So, in a way, all of that informs my work and what I do. And if it didn't, I'd be worried, I think, in a way, because it's not me.
Yeah, you can't separate from it.
Yeah, I suppose it's similar to me. I mean, even before Sangini, well before Sangini, I've been making work since my childhood, since the age of 8 when I made my first portrait, because my parents were musicians. And in India, what it's called baitak, means it's house sitting. It's a very, it's jamming session that people do in houses. It's like a normal thing.
Sounds brilliant.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's only I realized how brilliant it was after coming here, because you don't get it. So just artists get together, and it was my mother who had 4 kids. My dad would be there. So kids are involved. So you're involved as an artist, a mother, as families. So I grew up with that, and I remember at the age of 8, I saw this visiting guest singer who was singing away, and I just found him so fascinating and strange. And I was tucked into my dad, and I made this portrait, and very quietly I showed it to my dad, and they were so fascinated. They quickly shared it. Obviously, I was embarrassed, but that was I remember most, clear memory I have of making work. And so that's been the thread all along. Equally important, when I asked my dad, I want to study art, and he said, I'm sorry, darling, I can't send you to the college because it's too far away, and where we lived was not a safe place for women and girls. So that was my first experience of not having the education path that I wanted. Then I got married and I came here, and it was the same thing. I said, I want to study art, but because my husband was rotating in his job, I couldn't go to college in one place. But what I kept doing was to keep in touch with my art. Every year I would make work, I would write poetry. Back in the 80s when I came here, there was no infrastructure for what we have now in terms of artists, arts organizations. There's so much visibility, there's so much out there that you can actually plug into. When I first came, especially as somebody from outside, and who also was made to feel that you're from outside, it was like a shock to my system. So all of that meant that I needed a channel to kind of express what I was going through, and I would always make painting, and I began self-teaching, so I would go to the library, and in this country the libraries are just amazing. like amazing resource, which I would just sit all day when my husband would be in the hospital and make lots and lots of notes. And thanks to WA, I attended evening classes where I learnt oil painting and everything, life drawing. And they actually became, those foundations for me to continue working. And also the idea of experimentation, so not really stopping with the materials that are there. So I've always been fascinated to use like turmeric or kumkum, for example, and see, because they were materials, but they were not materials just to color the paper or the canvas. They were materials, they existed because they symbolized something of my culture and of myself. And once I began to figure all of this out, I realized that my art was an extension of myself and what I was experiencing. And of course, when I began working with Sangini, which was much later on, after its inception, I found a channel where the resource was all around me, the stories, the narratives, the women who were going through. And it was like a challenge, like when somebody is talking about their story, how do you portray that agony, that trauma, without making a woman's face which is crying or tears? It's about that kind of concept that you need to work at. And those were the challenges, that became more and more interesting for me. So in terms of my own practice, that's what I would do at night, like think about, for example, during a COVID period, all the sessions were on Zoom. And this instance when this young woman said, "Is everybody gone?" And I was like, yeah. And we're all women. And she took her hijab off. And this beautiful hair just came out. And this moment of kind of freedom as well. She said, "Oh, it's so hot." And she took, the hijab off. And I needed to draw that. I needed to capture that moment, that sense of kind of relief that she felt. It wasn't relief from oppression, but it was just a relief in terms of be able to feel like she doesn't have to cover her hair.
Feeling at home.
Because, feeling at home. And it was just me. So it's just really moments like that when women would be on Zoom with their head down making crafts, and they would suddenly start singing. And they would all start singing in Bengali this folk song. And for me, those were the moments, like deeply moving moments. And I needed to really kind of find ways to kind of capture that without making direct portrayal. And these are the challenges I look for, in my work. A lot of my work is also informed by the feminist practice, the feminist, angle that Sangini has in terms of the principles that we have. It is about giving that voice to women, giving that visibility to women. So it's important that my work is reflective of the lived experience, not only mine, of the black women that I work with. So women are always at the center of my work, figuratively, and then I also use a lot of abstract ways to actually kind of express the whatever emotion that I'm trying to portray. Equally, as director or the worker of the organization, I have a responsibility to develop a program of work. And this is where it's great for me, because I can think of ideas, project ideas, and go and get grants.
I'd love to hear a bit about, so could you tell us a couple of the recent projects and what you've got coming up?
So to give you an example, one project I did was called Women's House. I was in Paris in 2018 and to see Dior exhibition. Don't want to mention that, but that's the context. And then I ended up going to an exhibition where, for the first time, they brought all women artists' work together, including Judy Chicago's work. And that was like mind-blowing for me, because somebody that I had been reading, for me to be able to see the work of all the other women as well, was completely like mesmerizing. And I have a studio, so I personally have converted an end-terraced flat into a studio space, right? Wow. This is important because the studio doesn't have any, like a name at the front. I've kept the entrance like any other normal rest of the households that are their residences, just so that women, when they are walking in, they feel that they're walking into a house. But the moment they go in, it's a white space.
Okay.
So for me, that's the space that I work in. And when I was looking at this exhibition, I learned about the first exhibition that Judy Chicago did, called Women House, and the work that she did. And my daughter was there. She was looking across the room to me, and she was like, I think, Mom, you can do this. And particularly what I found in that exhibition, that the way feminism has been defined back in the 70s was from cisgender white perspective. And I felt that the perspective of minoritized women and also LGBTQ perspective was missing. And at the time, I was working with an artist who is a lesbian and bisexual. And we both always worked together. So I came back totally inspired, and I said, I have an idea that how about we use the studio, Women's House, we call it Women's House, and really looking at the idea of feminism from Black and minoritized perspective and LGBTQ perspective. Of course, she was completely on board. So, and we applied to Arts Council, and we received a grant for that. So for a year long, we made lots of drawings. We kind of tried to record what feminism meant to us in our daily lives. We also did some workshops with women and also artists, and asked them the question, what does feminism mean to you? To give you an example, our workshop with Bangladeshi women, when we asked what does feminism mean to you, they said, I think it's for white women. So that sense of, kind of detachment from this idea of equality was deeply, important for us to look at. And so we made work, and both of us, we did some collaborative work where we painted an entire room in terracotta background. And we used an Indian folk art expression called Varli art, which is made by women. And in India, in this village particularly, the women color the outside of the wall with terracotta paint, and they use rice paste to portray their daily lives, which means it's like animals, wells, or any festivals or events. Everything is portrayed. And we took that as a way to actually narrate our stories in a contemporary British context. And it was really interesting, very powerful exhibition. And we made individual work. We also displayed work by Sunderland Women's Art Group. For example, they made work on sanitary pads. And, using printmaking, they were making work. They made work directly on the kitchen wall, just like Judy Chicago and her colleagues, they did, and the women artists did in Women's House. So, and at the same time, Judy Chicago was just coincident. She was showing her work at Baltic. So Baltic invited us to do a workshop with the women. It was complete coincidence.
Amazing.
It's just incredible. You know, of course, it not only raised our confidence, our morale, but also Sangini's profile. And, you know, and it's the context. It's the context that we constantly try to bring in to our work, which is wider, but then it becomes local. This is much bigger level. This is what's happening, but what does it mean to you at local level, at your level? So another example I can give you, it was just, we were coming out of lockdown. So part of it took place during COVID, which was using Arabic calligraphy. And this time I worked with an Arabic calligraphy artist called Ruhia. She, you know, is based in Durham. Again, same story where you're an artist of color, but you just don't feel integrated. There are barriers. You just feel you're not understood. And slowly you start to alienate yourself. She actually did her master's at Sunderland University. And when I found out, I'm like, oh my God, I really need to kind of help her and see how I can open doors for her. And since then we began working. So I invited her to work with me. And using Arabic calligraphy, we looked at how Muslim women look at equality. And, you know, what does it mean for them? So, again, another example I can give you. Women were, you know, when we did the workshop, it was able to write their names in Arabic, using Arabic calligraphy. Their names were Arabic, but they didn't know the meaning of it. They could read Arabic, but they couldn't write it. And again, these were the instances that we were looking at where you're given a little bit, but not enough for you to feel a complete person.
Yeah.
And we used that as a catalyst for me and Ruhia to make collaborative work, and we made large-scale work which was displayed at Washington Art Gallery, and it was my first time of working with a medium, you know, Arabic calligraphy, which is beautiful and deeply interesting. I mean, I fell in love, you know, with that whole way of expressing. And I used, you know, a word called ana in Arabic, which means I, as in I am. And I used 4 languages. I, you know, can speak 2 or 3 languages. So I used these 4 languages, and I sat in a very meditative state and kept writing. And so it was a text-based work, and I just kept writing over and over again.
Very performative
until,
as well.
yes, until the words kind of disappeared. There was nothing left, and it was, again, kind of questioning. Like, I started off as I, but actually at the end of the process, I just disappeared, and there was a lot more fluidity and kind of reflecting on who am I, you know. But you know, it was a very interesting piece, and that was on display as well. So these are the 2 most recent projects that, you know, I can talk to you about. In terms of what's coming forward, I'm so happy to say that Nasim has joined us as a team. She's co-director with me, and one of the challenge that we were looking at in terms of the arts is, you know, going forward, if I am to exit the organization, which I was planning to, what would happen to the arts side of things, which has been a very important part of Sangini's program, because not only we do the participatory workshops, but we work with professional artists to produce important pieces of feminist-based work, and give them that space, you know. So I think with Nasim coming on board, you know, I feel very confident, and I know Nasim is very, very happy, because both of us, we can actually now think of ideas. We've already been talking about ideas in terms of text-based work, portraying violence against women and girls, you know, the whole Vogue area. You were talking about wedding dress. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I will. I mentioned my poem, the one I mentioned earlier, to Padma, and we were just sort of talking about it, and I said what I'd like us to do is, because we've been invited to do exhibits and work at a conference, isn't it, at Northumbria University. I don't think they'll mind us mentioning it, is to put together a white wedding dress, but an Asian wedding dress, a two-piece, a lehenga with a little top and a full skirt, but on it is having beads and a bit of embroidery, but also somehow embroidering on it women's experiences and what they've said. And I showed Padma, I had a flip chart sheet because I was worried about losing what women had said to me or to members of my team of how they felt or their instances of violence. So I wrote them down and I'd been adding to it. And I said what we should do is transcribe those somehow onto the dress. So when people look at it, they see a gorgeous wedding dress. But actually, as they get closer, they see and they can read what, you know, the women's experiences, and that would describe the institution of marriage, of what it could mean or does mean to some women, not all women, but some women, and within that, some women who are from a black and minoritised background as well, because we want to tell their stories as well. And behind it have some way of exhibiting something about a house, a family home, that what happens in a home we often don't know, and it's only when women tell us what is happening or a child tells us something. Sometimes it can be a man, but overall it's a woman or a child that tells us that those lives can change, and I said we should do something like that. So we're beginning to look at materials, and I think we should use pure silk fabric, really thick, luxurious fabric, to signify the status of marriage and how people see it. It is a special event, but if you are entering it with on a pathway that has included some form of physical or emotional abuse, that may or may not continue and may get worse. And we also know when women are pregnant, they're more at risk of harm, and the baby within the first year is also more at risk of harm. So it's about trying to capture those stories, so have a serious side to it as well as, but also what we want to do is invite the women to comment on this idea. We've got a couple of groups going, is to invite their thoughts and how they could help us shape it, and also develop the art itself. So it's not just Padma and I doing it, but it's actually women who've experienced it as well that can do the artwork in some form. So it's a collaborative, it's a collective piece of work rather than it being done and it's just shown. Yeah, but that idea came. I've always liked Tracy Emin, and I went to see the Sensation exhibition, and my son was a teenager, and we went down to London because I wanted him to see it, and I got him, and I kept on saying to him, look into that Tracy Emin's tent, look what's been written, what is in there, and we were chatting about it, and that's all. Her work has always been really interesting to me. So this dress is sort of inspired really by her work, but I didn't want to lose the experiences and the women's stories that are told. I came across through work, but also weaving those into current women's lives and also sort of looking forward as well.
Yeah. So lots to come.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think it's an ongoing process for me, and as I went along in my life, you know, I hit 50 because I've always wanted to be a full-time artist, and I could never do it. There was always something or the other. It was only when I hit 50 I really felt I have to now do it. And I was at the Arts Council. I left the job thinking this is what I'll do. And then, Sangini came along, and I thought, okay, I need to help this organization. And so again, my art kind of took, backseat. But at the same time, I would try and weave in, because my art is like breathing for me. It's so important for me. And more as I gone older, I realized that I do need to kind of make space for that, more space. Otherwise, I would be, I would be left feeling unfulfilled. And so I have learned, kind of, no matter what, at night time, I will have a little space just to either do a drawing or read, because I read a lot about other artists' work, and also research. My work is, a lot of times research-based, and also find connections. So, for example, next week, I've been invited to be an artist in residence for a feminist leadership conference in London. And again, it's the first time that they are engaging with art. So I did the course, which was run by Women's Resource Centre in London. And they said, we've never dealt with art before, and it's fascinating. Can you show me your work? So I showed them my work. And they said, you know what? We really want you to come and make some work in situ at the conference. And that's a really amazing challenge for me, because it's about listening to the conversation and be able to kind of translate that into work. But at the same time, I feel it's not about me just working alone. It's an opportunity for every single person, woman who is there, to be able to contribute. So it becomes a much more co-created piece rather than just me. So I become a facilitator, a conduit, rather than the artist who is doing something. So I try and find pathways, to keep my artistic bit alive.
Wonderful.
And
Nasim, what would you like to add?
Part of me joining was that I was inspired by Padma and Sri, who's I think she's the chair, the founder, that's it. And I was inspired. So when I was asked to join, I wanted to develop my art, but I could see that Padma could develop more art and also inspire the next generation. And looking at the sustainability of Sangini, we needed more women, more younger women to come on board. They're our next generation really to take it forward. So part of me coming on board was so that I could develop my art, but also Padma could have time, and that the board would feel reassured that we were moving forward, rather than sort of trying to survival, living from short-term grants to short-term, and doing one-off workshops. So we've got. This morning we went to Sunderland Winter Gardens and the library there, and we were part of a group it's got a horrible name in a way, OAC, which is All the Women's Artists. Is it? Collective. And we were part of a collective talking about the next exhibition, which is going to be in October for about 6 weeks. And we'd turned over ideas and we'd contributed. But to actually see that group running and see the ideas coming forward, so tentatively it's moved on to themes around sustainability and using recycle, reuse, repurpose, those kind of things. And the artists there, all women, were so interesting to hear and generating ideas. Women of all generations, all backgrounds, and that's in a way how we want to move forward. So that's another one of our strands we're going down. So whilst we are for black and minoritized women, we also want to be part of the bigger feminist movement around women and art. So we don't exclude ourselves from bigger conversations and also opportunities that might come about from that as well. Yeah. Amazing.
Thank you so much. I'm staring at, just as we're finishing, because we've kind of run out of time, but I'm staring at a rolled up piece of fabric in front of me that Padma has brought. and it'd be really great. We're going to attempt to describe this piece of work for any listeners. If we fail, that's fine, but we'll have a go at it.
I can hear the crackle.
So this is an ongoing project for me. It's a personal piece of work which I have developed on the back of Rohingya crisis that happened in Myanmar. And this was in response to that. And it's made on kozo paper. It's a Japanese paper. And using walnut ink, I've made marks. Essentially, these are tally marks, but they symbolize people who died.
Okay.
And
they're done small, aren't they? So they almost look like stitching.
Yes.
Yeah.
So again, it's that idea that they look like stitches. And what was interesting is that the paper is so fragile that sometimes it just kind of, just gathers like a fabric. So
these are beautiful.
Yeah, it's it's an ongoing piece of work. I've actually donated a couple of them, so they're missing. But I want to make a large number of this. And again, the display is a challenge because I need to figure out how they will be displayed. And even if they're not displayed, this is something that I visit from time to time. And I try to kind of spend a bit of time. It's my way of engaging with that politics of displacement, and suffering, and that trauma of peoples, a group of people.
The one that I can see right here is a spiral, and it's almost mandala-esque, isn't it? So it feels quite meditative in the process of how you've made that as well.
Yeah.
These are incredibly intricate and fragile pieces, aren't they?
Yes. And this is why, the display is kind of a challenge. In a sense, I have to think, how would it be displayed? But at the moment, I'm more than happy just to kind of keep going and keep this conversation going,
It's got a very deeper meaning to it as well, because each mark on there is a life.
Yeah.
And when you think about that life, was it a mother? Was it a mother? Was it a father? Was it a child? How did what was their what were their life experiences? Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you both for your time and coming to talk to us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear about your project and your work, and to be up here in the northeast as well. We've absolutely loved it. So I hope that lots of people are able to listen and learn about the project, learn about your work, be inspired, come and find out about you, and find out about the work you're doing, and hopefully there'll be some connections made as well.
Well, thank you for this opportunity and talking to us. It has been wonderful, and to be able to actually pause and think about what we have been doing. Otherwise, in the work that we do, you don't get that time unless you're writing a report on a project, which is a very technical experience. This has been a wonderful experience to really reflect back on our just lives and how the art and life and even my own experience of migration and everything interweaves into each other and creates a narrative that I live every day, So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, yeah. And hopefully it will influence other women that are listening. If they come across it accidentally, or they're keen followers, that they might think, I'd like to go up there, or I'd like to do something like that. You're describing Padma's work. But if you're up in the area again and you want to come to our studio, we can come and pick you up from any train station.
Yeah, amazing. If you, we'll put the contact details on the show notes. So if anybody is already local or who comes to the area and is interested in getting to know more, then we'll make sure they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, that would be good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll give a clap. Thank you. You've been listening to the WomanUp podcast. To find more of our episodes, subscribe via any of the usual podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, and more. For captioned episodes, please visit the WomanUp YouTube channel. And for news and updates, follow us on Instagram at woman.up.podcast.